And yeah, so we are recording now. And anyway, I was just saying Psychedelics Go is a consultancy that works with early movers in the psychedelic space to help launch their projects and give expert guidance across a number of different disciplines. You can reach me at jdennis@psychedelicsgo.com if you want to connect after today's webinar.
Absolutely. So yeah, we are pretty excited. Hi, Leo. Glad to see you here. Great. We got Mark from Ashland. Beautiful. You got to meet Mark and meet Delic. It's lovely. Ellis from Missouri. John, are you originally from Missouri?
No, I'm originally from Kansas.
Oh, right on.
There were some long battles fought in Civil War between Kansas and Missouri.
Great. Hopefully not too much of a grudge anymore. All right, well, let's dig in. So you sent me a message just a few days ago saying there was some very big news to share from the board, and I'd love to dig into that. What came up for you?
Yeah, so of course we always have to start with these disclaimers. Sorry to be the buzzkill always, but I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer unless you retain me outside of this Zoom meeting or YouTube video. And nothing that's going to be said today is legal advice. And I also like to quickly try to contextualize kind of what we're talking about here, just so people know how firm the information and how reliable it is. So just to quickly give a structure of Measure 109 in Oregon psilocybin law, we have a 71-page statute that was passed by voters in November of this year or last year. And that 71-page statute creates a 2-year developing period where the Psilocybin Advisory Board makes recommendations to a regulatory agency, and then that regulatory agency takes the recommendations from the board to create rules. And so far, just to bring you up to speed on the progress of this, the board has several deadlines that they have to meet in order to give the health authority with enough information so they can make informed rules. Part of the exciting and also difficult part of this whole enterprise is that this has never really been done in the so-called developed world. We don't really have a licensed framework for psilocybin or for any type of psychedelic services other than ketamine is just starting to get there, but there's not really, nothing like this currently exists, in the developed world. So this is totally new stuff, and they're in some ways trying to, start from scratch, and in other ways they're trying to, not reinvent the wheel. But so much has been kind of building up to these recommendations that the health authority will likely give significant deference to, at least on a lot of them. Although we don't really know how much deference they'll give, we don't know how much they'll modify them. But this is kind of setting the tone for everything that's to follow. And I think many of us observing kind of operate under the assumption that the final rules will generally be pretty close to the formal final recommendations that are made by the Psilocybin Advisory Board. So if that wasn't
so these are not laws, they're pretty firm recommendations that are very likely to be copied almost verbatim.
Well, very likely. We don't know how likely, but this is probably most likely going to set the majority of this will be close to how they finally turn out. Okay. So this is probably the most kind of detail that we've had about what Oregon psilocybin will look like since the measure passed in November last year. Essentially, many of us have been wondering, like, how do I get involved? What does this look like? What will people even be able to do? And this is the most detail we've got in basically 11 months of the bill being a law. So this is all exciting stuff, and the deadline the internal deadline just passed, and And we now have great ideas, particularly in not all areas, but with the training programs and what's going to be required of those, as well as in the products department and the details of products, what's going to be allowed, and that sort of thing. So yeah, so to kick it off, without further ado, the training rules that were or recommended, or the kind of recommendations that the board has finally made to the Oregon Health Authority, is that the training curriculum is going to be about a 120-hour program for what's called the core curriculum. And the core curriculum is basically the classroom where facilitators will get their basic kind of book knowledge, video knowledge, verbal knowledge, and you know, that's going to be
so meaning a blend of online and in person and at home study.
Yeah, that is a great point. Is there the law actually parses out some portion of it that has to be in person, and this is of course just a recommendation, but you know, I take this to be what it will. The recommendation has been made that has to be a minimum of 25% of the class needs to be done in person. And then on top of that, there should be at least, of the remaining 75%, at least 50% of that has to be done kind of through a synchronous program. So something
like a live Zoom.
A live interaction, yeah,
right
exactly.
On. Okay, so we're talking roughly 30 hours in person, a bunch of time on Zoom, and then
and then a possibility of a significant portion being pre-recorded type of material, so that's for the core curriculum. And then the contents of the curriculum have also been fairly clearly established. So people who are going to be going through these classes there's going to be mandatory sections, just like in any kind of degree program. You'll have to study a minimum number of hours and the kind of historical, traditional, and contemporary plant medicine practices and uses. There'll be significant portion on diversity, equity, and inclusion, including racial justice and kind of the impact. I think what this alludes to is the impact that the war on drugs has had on marginalized communities. Things about safety, kind of basics about psychopharmacology and neuroscience and the research that's happening across these different universities. Then there's going to be a section just on core facilitation skills, which is probably when you're really starting to get down to like what your role is as a facilitator, what that looks like. And then, the actual conducting of a preparation and orientation session. So, you're going to have to be taught how to screen people, what to look for, what kinds of conversations to have at the earliest stages. And then, 20 hours, a minimum of classroom time, through those different methods, must be about the administration itself. And then there's a bunch of time devoted to the integration that follows after the session. And then interestingly, there's a mandatory module about group facilitation. So one of the questions that 109 doesn't answer, and it kind of pushes to regulators to decide finally, is whether group sessions are going to be allowed. And so far, all the conversations that have really occurred at the board have all been pretty largely favorable, and they seem to be leaning that way. So this is, a firm recommendation that group facilitation be allowed. So that's one of the things that probably is another nod in that factor. So yeah, that's
extraordinary. Okay, so how did this play out? Was this kind of like a speech that they were giving over the internet? Or how has this knowledge been disseminated? Like you're on the total opposite side of the state in a sense.
Yeah, so there were just motions that were voted on and passed, and they were kind of they're numbered, and they went down, and they said, we as the different subcommittees had gone through their kind of internal process, training and products, and the equity subcommittee also weighed in, which is, again, one of the beautiful things about Measure 109 is that, equity is at the heart of the law. It's core to its design, that this not be a system that perpetuates, the kind of marginalization of communities that has gone on forever. And so instead of just as a mere afterthought that, let's consider that this through an equity lens, equity is being kind of built by design into the regulations themselves, which is one of the many, many things I really like about about Measure 109. But I'm sorry, you asked a question and I got on the equity.
No, just how have you been catching all this? Is it kind of like a broadcast you catch, a live stream?
Yeah, so the Oregon Health Authority does a Zoom, like they're available through government Zoom, but they're public meetings that anyone in the world can just log in and attend live. And if you're not able to attend the meetings live, you can go back, and the audios are all posted on the website for later listening. So, this has been the process that they built up to get here. And in this meeting that they had just on Wednesday, they finally made, the most action that they've made in I guess they started at end of March. So that's still only, 8 months running. But still, this has been kind of the biggest milestone kind of to date and in the process of Oregon's kind of rulemaking.
Okay. And you've been following for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I actually became involved initially during the campaign. I volunteered in phone banks and just called Oregon voters and talked to them about psilocybin, and had some really interesting conversations with people who just fell all over the continuum about just these different about psilocybin and the war on drugs and all of it. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. And I think, that's probably right around the time we connected. I know you kind of came through some of our courses, and we've been in touch for a long time. And I guess disclosure, we got to hang out in Las Vegas at Meet Delic. And people would see that in the last YouTube video. We were recording in person, and Gary Michael Smith, author of Psychedelic Alex, aka Psychedelic Alex, was there, helping quite a bit. And he always has some really great insight. But beautiful book if you're looking up at understanding the legal situations in America.
Yeah, and that's the first book that was ever written like solely on the topic of the law of psychedelics, and it's a great resource that I refer to frequently as I'm researching different things.
Excellent. Okay, so do we know much more about rules? So like, could some group in New Hampshire, for instance, develop training for Oregon?
This is not yet fully known. So that was not included in the recommendations that were here now. And in fact, I'm not exactly sure. It was argued that the in-person class is critical for learning and retention and that kind of thing. But you kind of can't help but wonder if perhaps that was designed to stop the New Hampshire training program from operating fully in Oregon. You don't know that for sure, but you wonder.
What I find interesting here, John, is that a lot of people are, it seems like in this planning process, are developing this so it's really good for Oregon, like kind of protecting Oregon, putting in a lot of rules to keep it inside Oregon, which I think is really nice. Oregon's an amazing state, but not much population, right? And probably besides like Portland and Beaverton, like economically, I don't know how strong Oregon is generally, but outside opinion. So I think generally speaking, this is really good for the people of Oregon.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be great. All over. I mean, people, when California might beat us to become the first, it's possible, or they may not be far behind, but
I think Oregon's going to do it first, but you're right. There's a chance. There is a chance.
I think a fairly slim chance, but it's possible, I think still. But in any event, there's, all eyes are on Oregon because, this has just never been done. And, multiple states, I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but other states are modeling their laws and rules after Oregon. So it's just, it's, I think there's people who are involved with the Drug Policy Alliance who are, regularly attending meetings. And so they're following it closely. And I believe I've heard rumor that they may be involved behind the scenes and just helping, kind of get these things right in an informed way. But I'm not 100% sure of that. But they basically, there are there's a lot of attention, so there's a lot of people looking out to make sure that it gets done in a good way, for sure.
Good. And anything more on education that you thought was really important before we jump?
Yeah. So the other part of that is that, well, first off, there's 40, in addition to the 120 hours of core curriculum, there's another 40 hours that have to happen with basically a clinical training, like a practicum. And essentially, the practicum will, obviously be in person, and I believe 30 hours of that has to be administration itself. And then I think the other remaining 10 are kind of split between, practice of doing like the preparation and integration kind of work and screening work. So that'll be a piece. And then the other interesting piece that came out is that it's been, and again, these are all recommendations, so I'm going to keep stressing that, but the curriculum need not offer like a training program for people who are interested in developing training programs. They don't actually have to provide the entire 120-hour program. They're going to be allowed to kind of dice it into different modules across these different subject areas. So it means that a facilitator it will be able to shop around and say, I want to take the ethics class from these guys, and I want to take the group administration class from these guys.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And they don't have to offer the whole thing. So there could, it creates this kind of marketplace where people could conceivably develop specialties in different, subject areas. And that's pretty exciting.
Have you seen any nonprofit attention on the education front?
I need to reach out actually to some folks, but the one thing I've heard is that there's a group called the Fruiting Bodies Collective that I think you've been in more touch with.
Yeah, we kind of helped them out a little bit near the beginning. Pretty exciting. They're going to help provide really low cost training, and I believe also with an eye on BIPOC specific audience, BIPOC and queer, I think, which is really helpful.
Yeah, and the other thing about kind of the nonprofit on training piece that I'm aware of is, as you probably know, Tom Eckart's wife, Cherie Eckart, Cherie Eckart was one of the co-founders of this whole kind of Oregon movement, and the chief co-petitioner of Measure 109. From what I understand, was Tom Eckart's like right hand throughout the entire process. She passed away, unfortunately, I believe in December, and right after the law passed, and there's been a memorial established to her honor that is going to create scholarships for people to get training. Because it is thought that it could be the cost of it could be a barrier for a lot of folks. So, there'll be a really beautiful memorial in her honor to just kind of continue that vision that she had that led to this conversation.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I'm happy to hear they're doing it that way. And it was, definitely a big surprise when she passed. It was certainly not expected at all. I hope Tom's doing all right with it. I'm sure it's hard every day, but it's just incredible what they've been able to pull off here. And just nationally and internationally, tons of support for this. And I think that probably irked some people. Did you ever notice attention or like complaints from people in Oregon critiquing all this external. I know I got flamed a few times for being involved.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard when I was talking to voters, there were some people who asked about like the funding and, and this kind of thing. And, you know, you try not to be overly specific, but, a lot of it came from a couple of, kind of donors who believe in, drug policy reform and, put their money where their mouth is kind of thing. And, so there was some of that, that people were nervous about, that I talked to, but by and large, um, you know, I haven't gotten a whole lot of that, other than when outside companies are trying to disrupt Oregon's program as being apart from the FDA kind of pathway. But
that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. And I guess, man, there's so many ways we could go here. Before we jump to the next segment, I just kind of want to interrupt and kind of ask about this. What is the relationship to what's happening in Oregon to medical or therapeutic work? Like what's the phrasing look like? It's really different.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. And so this is an unanswered question, but it was kind of sold to voters as a psilocybin therapy. And the core things that define like a therapy really don't apply here, and as most people think of therapy. But the facilitators only have to have a high school diploma, and then graduate from an approved course and take a test. There's been a recommendation; it will be a multiple choice test, and then it'll be once they have that done, then they're essentially they have to submit their CPR license. At least that was one of the recommendations that came out of this process, that they'll have to have that and submit just the regular background checks. They have to consent to a criminal background check, and there will be disqualifying types of convictions, and there's still some debate about what those ought to be. But once you go through that process, you're just ready to facilitate, and it almost doesn't matter. On one level, like if you have your license, you're ready to practice, psilocybin facilitation, and you have a kind of a professional duty to take care of the people in your care. But that doesn't go into therapy. That is shy of therapy, and so the question of how those are going to intersect is a really interesting one, and it hasn't been totally resolved yet. But it seems that with therapy, therapists probably charge on average between $250 and $450 an hour or so, depending on where you're at and who you're going to. And a psilocybin facilitator is probably going to charge 40 to 60 or something an hour, potentially. That's my own prediction. That's but the question is, if it's supposed to be done in a non-directive manner, and you're in the facility, you're not getting like actual like talk therapy during session. Well, why would you pay somebody potentially that much money when you could pay them a fraction of that and still have your experience? So I think there'll be kind of extensive therapy for the preparation and the build-up work. There'll be the referring it out to a person to the psilocybin service center or a facilitator for that therapeutic piece, and then they'll go back and do their integration work, and they'll kind of seamlessly have those relationships. And I'm sure there will be facilitators who are licensed therapists. Well, I'm not sure that. We don't actually know that the Oregon board that governs that will approve and condone that as being part of the scope of their therapist license. But we don't know that for sure. But that's possible. They might allow it. But so it'd be kind of that seamless transition, between the either between the therapist and the facilitator, unless the there will be few instances where they are the facilitator themselves. But so anyway, that's on the therapeutic side. But then for the rest of it, the people aren't going to arrive at the facilities through a medical referral. They're going to show up directly, through the website, whatever. And that pipeline of clients to the service center is going to be a really interesting one, and how sites will kind of develop these niche practices where some of them will be, most likely like maybe more spiritual or wellness focused. There may be some that are more, like spa focused, where you're, soaking pools, and, there's been talk that, massage therapy might be allowed with, prior informed consent, and those kinds of therapeutic modalities. And, there may be ceremonial type of service centers that, so, there's going to be this kind of marketplace for that too, where there probably is significant diversity in what, an experience looks like. So that means there can be a wide variety of training programs that, really emphasize, particular aspects of it. But I think it's really anybody's, guess right now as to what kind of culture is going to rise from that, what kind of, when you talk about, decades or century, just decades of prohibition, where the entirety of psychedelic culture has been pushed underground, and, we're going to be able to operate kind of under the light of day for the first time in a very long time in many of our lives. It's just kind of hard to see exactly the direction that's going to go.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And we've speculated, you and I, about kind of psychedelic churches explicitly, and that's so fascinating, endlessly interesting. And I guess plug, you and I did a series together, I guess last winter. I wish I remember the title. Something along the lines of religious freedom in the United States and how psychedelics fit in.
Psychedelics and religious liberties, or something like that. Yeah.
I'll paste a link in here if anybody wants to sign up for that later. It's free. A lot of really great attorneys contributed, so definitely worth checking out, I think. Cool. Now, anything more on education before we jump to manufacture?
I think that about covers it. They're going to require that everybody who presents any kind of curriculum in the core curriculum piece has to have significant relevant experience and or education in the areas on which they are presenting. So it's not that's the recommendation, of course. We don't know what that means. Does it mean you have to come out and tell the Oregon government, yeah, I've been doing underground work illegally for decades, so I'm qualified to do this work? So
we don't really know what that looks like. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of scary, honestly.
Yeah. I hate to just be such a softy on this, but I feel like the people who are on the board are just sensitive enough to these kinds of considerations that I really don't anticipate that they're going to require anybody to sign anything that's actually incriminating. I just couldn't see them doing that. But we also just don't know what that means. So that's just kind of an interesting question that remains to be resolved.
Yeah. And really, if the state of Oregon is following the wishes of the people of Oregon, then these people should be fine. It's certainly creepy, but this has been a perpetual issue even in cannabis, right? All right, cannabis is legal. All right, how do you get stuff into Oregon now? Where are your genetics, your clones, all that stuff? And people have to break the law to get the legal market started. It's fascinating.
I'm there's a part of me that's a little nervous that I'm glad to see that we're making these kind of progresses, or but a lot of disciplines in professions, once they start to regulate themselves, then we have people who go out and prosecute people for unauthorized practice of medicine or unauthorized practice of law. so far there's not been talk about something that goes out and like prosecutes people for, unauthorized practice of psychedelic facilitation. But, if maybe once the industry's established enough, they may think that there's no place for an underground in it anymore. And that's just kind of a weird thought.
I believe the underground will always be there. I don't think there's really a way around it, especially if we get hyper medicalized and things are, $9,000 to $20,000. It just makes the black market, gray market for therapy persist. So, pricing structures, we see this in cannabis too. I hate to keep making these analogies, but where I am, the taxation on cannabis is insane. And as a result, the black market persists. And it's largely because of pricing and taxes. I don't really know how you would address it because the whole rhetoric was tax the shit out of it, is what everybody says. And I'm like, okay, like, cool, but is that really the solution? We've got to be careful of unintended consequences, and attorneys know that pretty well.
Yeah, I've heard concern that if they deregulate federally and legalize, that the federal tax that they're going to impose on it is also going to be a really stiff tax, that it's probably going to cause the black market to flourish again, because it'll be, or it is already kind of competitive in some ways, but if you add another 17% when it's already taxed to the hilt, some areas, who knows?
Right. These are things that we're going to see play out over the next bunch of years. And, you're right. They are already competing. They've already got traction, big customer bases, and people are hungry as hell. I was hearing about the demand recently for underground work in San Francisco Bay Area, and it is through the roof. It's really, really crazy. And I imagine with these recent kind of ethics shakeups, there's going to be even maybe higher demand.
Yeah.
So next up, products, manufacture, growing, all sorts of interesting stuff there.
Yeah. So let me scroll down. That was the very last thing about education is another key question of Measure 109 is what is meant by non-directive facilitation. So the statute says that, a facilitator should facilitate services in a non-directive manner, but it doesn't really define what that is. And one of the recommendations from the board is to define it as an approach to facilitation in which the facilitator maintains a consistent, warm, and affirming disposition with the client while avoiding giving the client direct advice or directly interpreting the client's statements or behaviors. The goal of non-directive facilitation is for clients to discover things about themselves for themselves with minimal guidance from a facilitator. Pace and direction is controlled by the client. An exception would be when safety is at stake, at which point it may be incumbent on facilitator to become directive in the service of safety. So another interesting question of 109 is like, what is actually, what's the role of the facilitator? I mean, they have to be present, but beyond that, is there, anything else that can happen? That
cheap and funny analogy, John, might be like bowling versus bumper bowling. It's more than that, obviously, but it's, adding safety, adding comfort and warmth. A supportive spirit, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's perhaps appropriate, right? For, the bare minimum requirements they're putting in place.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting, but they definitely need some, kind of Zendo style, harm reduction teams and people who are trained in that to step in. And that's I think probably one of the critical, along with screening, I think are the critical kind of roles. But anyway, we are moving on to products. So the products committee, so this is all interesting because, we're having all these different timelines and we're trying to get everything ready to roll by, as early as possible in 2023. And so, we need products kind of earlier in the process so we can start the training earlier and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're getting to products now. One of the recommendations, which I found very interesting, was that the OHA is discouraged from prohibiting food ingredients, or additives solely on the basis of being able to potentiate, attenuate, or affect the onset of action or duration, as these are not inherently adverse.
Hold on. Let's do that over, John. So
Yeah.
you're saying that there's the state cannot get in the way of this, or they can?
The recommendation is that they not, so like I think what this is referring to is like lemon tech, for instance.
Right.
If you soak psilocybin in lemon for half an hour, it's rumored at least to help speed up the breakdown of psilocybin into psilocin,
Mm-hmm.
so you can process it, and so you have faster onset with more intense effects and shorter duration. So they are, what I read this to say is that the board is discouraging the health authority from preventing stuff like that from happening. So, it could also mean MAOIs, but
that's a big thing, right? That's it kind of brings in danger more to the scenario when we start playing with MAOIs. Like risk profile of psilocybin mushrooms so low, and then you start adding in other things and the risk can compound. I'm not totally against the MAOI thing. I just think, like that's a really great. Yeah, thanks for being here, Mark. We'll talk soon. Yeah, it's just really interesting to see them be aware of it. I guess it makes sense because this is a big swath of psychedelic people helping steer this.
Well, and then there's a concern that, even if you prohibit it, somebody could take it while in the bathroom or take it right before they come in, and you might not have any idea about it. So there's a certain kind of literacy that we need to develop, or folks need to develop, to be aware of what could go wrong and how to identify the signs and how to warn people to avoid those potential hazards. So with but there is a recommendation that, so just because it has an effect, and the other one I think of is like the so-called Stamets stack, lion's mane, psilocybin, and niacin. There's a kind of certain synergies that people explore, and to people report good effects with that. So this kind of allows, if these recommendations are upheld, it will allow some room for experimentation and for innovation, and for something beyond just showing up and taking just psilocybin. So that's kind of an exciting kind of side note, I guess. They're supposed to basically limit it to, in the initial stage of the program, they're going to only allow mushroom and mycelium kind of based psilocybin. So synthetic psilocybin, at least this is the recommendation that they just kind of announced, that it's not going to be allowed, that only the mushroom and naturally growing psilocybin, and as well as extracts.
So we could do a pure isolate extract, not synthetically made, though.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And there's multiple solvents that can be used to extract psilocybin, and they've decided to announce, or recommend which ones should be allowed, and they are going to potentially allow methanol, ethanol, water, and acetic acid. That's a recommendation. So I haven't heard many reports of kind of the difference between taking an extracted psilocybin. I mean, other than just kind of a basic, tincture kind of thing. But I'm sure that there'll be, a diverse products market that will accommodate a number of different needs and a number of different, tastes as well.
That's interesting. So what are there any kind of routes of administration that are super interesting to you right now, that
There,
might be available here?
there was a talk about whether, and I forget the scientific word for it, but it basically I think it was pulmonary was in there somewhere, but
Hmm.
people were thinking about vape pens or nebulizers, and whether
Hmm.
those should be allowed. And you know, I don't actually remember what they decided on that, but there was a concern that if we just, kind of make it vape pens, dosing's hard to get. And, do we really want to be, supporting people smoking more or whatever, or vaping?
Sounds like so there's a bunch of Israeli cannabis firms, or at least one I know of, who's doing really controlled doses on vape pens, though we all know that it's really easy to manufacture vape cartridges. So it's quite interesting how that kind of works. And yeah, I hear that concern. The nebulizer thing is interesting though. I've seen a lot of memes on Instagram like, hey God, please make smokable psilocybin. But this is, I'm sure people are doing it. It's not too, um, yeah, totally. We could theoretically, let's see. There's just so many angles here. It's fascinating. And we got to watch it closely, right? We want to make sure there are going to be bad actors. There's no way around it. So, just we've got to be vigilant. We've got to be, staying aware of like what all these groups are doing. One thing that's a little funky is that these groups can't advertise, right? So how are we going to be able to track them? Do you think there's going to be kind of a registered list?
Yeah. So I imagine that, facilitators and service centers are separately licensed, and, they'll all, I think with pretty much every type of licensing that I know of, that's, government licensed, sure. There's a database that you can go and see the current list of people who are licensed, and you may be able to get contact information from them. We don't know whether that will, contain other information about types of services, like whether they identify as working with, religious, clients, or medical clients, or, wellness, adult use type clients. What if there's a specialty indicated, there could be something like that that's done at that level. But the law actually itself doesn't prohibit advertising. The law doesn't really allow the Oregon Health Authority to prevent advertising of psilocybin services to the public. So the facilities will be able, I mean, they can regulate it, of course,
Mhm.
but they can't really prohibit that. They can prohibit the advertising of direct products. So that is, I know I've heard rumor that there might be some big name mycologists who are getting in the Oregon game, and to go, get their product, like that would be something that, would be kind of cool to develop that market like that. But, you know, but we're not sure yet whether that'll be prohibited. It very well may be. But so far, I think one of the committees made a recommendation that they not prohibit that, so that where people do have, limitations physically, that prevent them from accessing, maybe they can't swallow, maybe they can't chew, maybe they need to take it in a different way. They should be able to certainly know what's possible and how to access that. So
Mm.
I think that kind of reasoning has been faring well to promote a marketing kind of you know advertising market for it. But
Mm. That's interesting. So, was there talk of, well, so you hinted at this earlier, like, will people be able to start manufacture early?
so the law doesn't really allow that. If they were to try to do that, they'd have to go in and change it through the legislative process, which
Okay.
I haven't heard serious, movement towards that, and that's a pretty big deal. So, they'll probably not be able to start actual manufacture until licenses are issued in the beginning of 2023. But it's pretty much as soon as that happens, there'll probably be regulations on the number of the amount of product that can be made by any individual manufacturer. So it doesn't take a ton of psilocybin to it's easy to grow mushrooms, and it's easy to grow a big farm full of mushrooms. And the question is, how many of them can the Oregon market sustain compared with how many people want to enter it? So I think that market may crowd quickly, potentially.
I didn't get to share this with you yet, but in Miami at the Wonderland conference, I met somebody in Canada who said that there's so much psilocybin mushroom grow happening there that the price is near zero, and a lot of these people have very large trash bags just filled, and they can't sell it. So the price is near zero. They had to shut down massive amounts of grows. It's just incredible. And Oregon already had over manufacture of cannabis at one point, so this is likely. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah. So and the good news of that is it means, when the government's going to, I've heard the policy analyst, Jesse Sweet. Jesse, you're doing a great job. Really appreciate the care and thought and the delicacy that you bring and the grace to the process. It's but he had suggested at one point that he didn't think that the measure gave the health authority the permission to deny anybody a license based on the market being too saturated. So he seemed to suggest that the way they're going to solve that problem is to simply keep the grows really small, or keep them relatively small, so that it gives people a fair chance that you can actually be profitable, and they're not just a few really large grows of scale that can undercut the price for everyone else.
That's interesting. Have there been any discussions on strains or specific cultivars, or are we just dealing with specific species?
Yeah. So, just species. Yeah. No talk of strain at all. Yeah. Just, cubensis is.
Cubensis is the only one, right? Azure Essence, no go. There's some weird stuff there, obviously, but
yeah. So the wood lovers paralysis, I think that'll be probably stop those species from getting approved for probably quite a while, depending on how fast research catches up. But Oregon doesn't want to experiment on that front.
This is already experimental enough, right?
Yeah, right. So yeah, so but they're supposed to review it every 12 months, beginning in 2024, for a number of different things, including strains allowed and whether synthetics will be allowed.
Cool. So next, before we take questions from folks here, I just want to kind of bring in some comments from last week's episode or 2 weeks ago's episode. So Joe Davis says, I really admire Oregon for trying to allow grown-ups to function as grown-ups and not as controlled and directed children. But listening to this discussion, it sounds like there's a lot of unnecessary regimentation going on. They should simply decriminalize and legalize psilocybin mushrooms, but no, there are a lot of human parasites stepping in to get a piece of the action. And a lot of policymakers with their, not something I'm going to read on air. So this is an interesting conversation, right? Like Oregon, at the same time this mushroom thing happened, also decriminalized effectively all drugs. And this is hard for me to get when it happened. It was a whole struggle. But it looks like that is true. So in this next part, Joe Davis is talking about parasites and like politicians, policymakers. I'm like, this is so fresh that this is the way it's going to happen if we want it to be controlled in some way. I'm all for wide open legalization. I just understand sometimes there needs to be increments. and it's okay to be frustrated about it, but we got to be real about it too.
Yeah, and I don't think actually that's a common misconception I heard frequently repeated in the media, which is that Oregon's decrim bill, Measure 110, decriminalizes all drugs. It actually only decriminalizes certain amounts of certain drugs. So,
John,
sorry to
it's killing me.
burst your bubble. DMT
Well,
is illegal, still mescaline, still illegal. MDMA is legal. I mean, so there's like, if you have
decrim, not legal.
Thank you. Yes. Well, if you get caught with it, you get either $100 fine or have to call a substance abuse screening hotline, as I understand it. And then you're just let go as long as you don't have too much of it, of any of the 8 on the list.
It's similar to the Portugal model. I like that. It's going in the right direction. Again, it's better than what we had, and it's going in the direction of perfect. And there's a lot of downstream stuff. So if folks want to start asking questions, either in the chat or in the question box, we can start asking or answering those. I think we're going to wrap in about 10 minutes or so.
So the next steps for this process is, if any of this that is out there now, like we've talked about today, and these recommendations are like offensive, you have place to weigh in before the rules get drafted. So between December 13th and December 15th, the health authority is going to be holding these public listening sessions where I think 2 or 3 hours long each, and there's 3 of them about different subject matters. You can weigh in about, whatever you think about really anything, but particularly, I think, the recommendations by the board. And then the rules themselves for these limited areas will probably be, they're hoping to publish them by March 1st, for these, and it'll be actually the first draft of them. And then from April 1st to April 21st is what's planned to be the public comment period. So we know now that'll be, if there is, I don't necessarily anticipate. I really feel pretty good about the way this process is unfolding. But if there's anything that, there needs to be like, grassroots action on, or that kind of, thing, April 1st to April 21st is going to be the public comment period, where it's our chance to, have input. And, the way I see it, Measure 109 was a people's law to begin with. It belongs to us. We voted for it. We volunteered, we donated, we made it happen, and it still belongs to us. And we have to make it as good as it can be, and just set a good example and a good tone for the rest of the world that's going to follow. And of course we're in the legacy, like we're not the first. We walk on, sacred lands and ancestral lands. But for the West, this is it. So anyway, April 1st to 21st will be public comment period. So we'll see.
So we got a little bit of time. How active are you seeing people be from Oregon on this?
Yeah, so initially there was just a group of maybe 3 or 4 of us who were at pretty much all the meetings. And that number has been growing quite a bit. And it's been interesting to see how more and more people are starting to show up and comment more. And it's kind of interesting that it took a little while for people to start following it closely. But now it is, there's probably, 10 or so people whose name I see, pretty regularly. So, and the things that some of them say are like, I can't believe more people aren't watching this.
That's interesting. So folks in Oregon, please watch carefully. And I think folks who are, and Leo here, please ask your question in the chat or Q&A, we'll read it for you. Totally. Yeah, people from other states can learn from what's going on here and apply it to their own locales, either state, county, or federal, maybe even, or town even. I keep toying with the Ellis, can you clarify who is the guy from Synthesis? I know there's, I've heard rumor that Synthesis is trying to move operations to the States. I don't really know how that works. And I do know they have an eye on Oregon, but I don't know what that is. And Leo, feel free to throw your question there as well. John, do you know anything more about Synthesis in Oregon?
I do a little bit. I know they recently bought a retreat center in Southern Oregon, and they're planning to open it. And they are, establishing themselves. They are, I don't, I don't want to necessarily disclose too much about them, but I know that they are, I've actually met someone involved with them at Meet Delic and had some really great conversations and learned a lot
That
about
board
them.
member that we chatted with?
Yep.
Yeah, fascinating person. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I didn't realize they had like caps on their income amounts where it's like 15% max, like they're never gonna
Oh,
profit than that.
so the question here is if they're helping with the committee. Have you seen them be involved?
No, I know that there was kind of a group of folks who were kind of meeting like unofficially to help kind of generate content and recommendations. And I know that they were a part of that, but that wasn't like formal. I don't think they were formally involved, but they were pretty, they were pretty close to the measure, as is my understanding.
Great. And Leo, still happy to answer your question in the last couple of minutes we got here. Here we go. All right, so John, I'll read it for you. Curious about your opinion on the disqualified as far as who cannot be a facilitator. I have strong feelings about this. I have worked as a mitigation specialist, writing court reports about those who receive criminal charges. So often there is historical trauma and abuse in those who have a criminal history, and people turn their lives around. Like, why can't that be a case-by-case basis? I know murderers I finally helped get out, and they were no longer the person they were who murdered. Yeah, no worries, Leo. I think that makes sense. And John has done a lot of really great charitable legal work. So might have an interesting answer here.
Yeah, well, a lot of people on the left believe that expungements are kind of a fundamental, a justice equity kind of issue, that your past shouldn't necessarily, follow you forever. And, many people are similarly, think that there ought to be some pathway to get relief if you're like a sex offender, to get, that doesn't necessarily have to, not all your neighbors need to know that thing that you did, when you were 20, but when you're 80, or something like that, that people can, heal, they can grow, and they can change, and that your past wrongs don't need to define you forever. I think Michelle Alexander puts it really well when she's like, I've never met someone who's not a criminal. But so with respect to what that means, but we also want to like not just let people with propensities for abuse kind of oversee people who are in a super vulnerable, delicate kind of state.
So I see Leo's point. It's like, if you've murdered 3 people, that's different if you murdered like one person 15 years ago. But is there discussion happening about, like, I know we chatted about this, like felony holders and other things, like how does that fit in?
Yeah, so I think I don't think it's going to look exactly at like the severity of the crime. I think it's, and this is not finalized by any means, but there was talk in a committee just yesterday, I believe, about what to do with different types of convictions. And the thing is, if the type of conviction would relate to your ability to safely facilitate, then it could matter. But if it's wholly unrelated, it wouldn't. And of course, as it engenders strong feelings in this space, it engenders strong feelings in the committee meetings, and there's heated debate about where those lines ought to be drawn. and, of protection versus, equity, essentially. I mean, protection is also equity, because if people are getting harmed, that's not good, but, it's basically, yeah, like, not all crimes necessarily reflect on character. So I think there's just going to be a fairly nuanced approach, but I don't think we know exactly what that is yet.
Right on. Yeah. And, Oregon does lean progressive for sure. So in my external opinion, living in Colorado, you might think it's super left, but there's still some wild shit going on here. So yeah, it's always up to interpretation, up to the voter, and they will take your public comment into account if you're in Oregon, I believe. So be loud. If you believe in something, rattle those cages. It's like you say, it's crazy how many people aren't involved. I'm glad there's an inclusion and diversity committee. There's a lot of committees, so yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting idea, Leo, about having a committee. Yeah, you might reach out to some folks like Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca Cronman's with Planned Parenthood, a writer of ours, different thing. Rebecca Martinez at Fruiting Bodies Collective might be a really great ally. And I honestly, I don't really expect people running the show in Oregon around this are really gonna watch, but maybe they will. Maybe two of them will. We'll see what we can do.
I've been surprised at hearing some folks watch it.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, the folks who are doing this are definitely like devoted, loyal civil servants, and they spend hours and hours doing this. And I imagine they'd be. I mean, I'd have to be a little curious of what people are saying about that process.
Yeah. Well, people have put in so much work. Like Tom Eckert's put in so much work. You even just as kind of activist, like third-party activist, like amazing amount of work. So it's incredible to see what's happening. And this is politics in action. We can do things. Ellis is asking, how could an interested grad student in Portland get involved?
Yeah, it's a great question. It all just depends on what you're wanting to do. I don't know if you wanted to. I think the thing that most people are interested in knowing about is becoming a facilitator, and that'll be. They're going to start the program before, like, facilitator training programs are going to launch before 2023, most likely, and. So essentially, if that's the goal, and we know that there will be some equity, scholarships available, but they're otherwise going to be fairly costly, many of them, essentially start saving to pay your tuition for a program, I guess, would be, if that's.
And get politically involved too. Yeah. The training from CIIS is different from this training. I can disclose that I have a strong interest in offering training there. So, stay tuned. And where Fruiting Bodies Collective is also going to be. Ellis, you might just try to reach out to Fruiting Bodies Collective and meet them, get involved in the meetings and whatever else. Yeah. And glad you're here and glad you're interested. Yeah.
Yeah.
John, anything else you want to close on?
Nope. We'll just, the next kind of big milestone is, coming up with the first draft of the rules in early March. So there'll be other developments, but that's kind of the next big milestone where we'll finally have something to sink our teeth into and tear apart. So
yeah, absolutely. I love it. And so we'll do this again in about 2 weeks, everybody. Stay tuned. This is going to be a regular segment for the foreseeable future, upwards of 2 years plus. So stay tuned, and more attorneys coming. I just love that attorneys want to hang out and talk law. Yeah. So John, thank you very much. And where can people learn about you and your services and Psychedelics Go?
Yeah, psychedelicsgo.com is the website, and you can reach me at the letter J, Dennis, Dennis, at psychedelicsgo.com.
Great. All right, John Dennis, thank you very much. Thank you
Thanks,
all for
Joe.
tuning in. And you can check this out later on Facebook, YouTube, probably a few other places as well. Take care, everybody. And until next time,
Bye.
signing off.